All right. Buzzwords are wasting your organization's resources. So phrases like blockchain, digital transformation, and big data cause miscommunication, distraction, and ineffective solutions. But at the same time, they present tremendous opportunity to your supply chain. So this last fall, we presented on the topic of buzzwords at the ASCM Connect North America Conference, and we started off with a little experiment. We were thinking of doing that experiment here today, but we thought it might be a little clunky on Teams. So instead, I'm just going to summarize what we did. And actually, I should confirm that you can see my screen. It looks like you can. Okay. We started off by going through one by one a few buzzwords. And so the one we started with was blockchain. And we asked the audience to raise their hands if they are familiar with the term blockchain and supply chain. And the whole audience, well, most of the audience, raised their hand. Then we said, keep your hand up if you use blockchain in your supply chain. And the entire audience lowered their hands. Then we did a similar thing with artificial intelligence. I'd say the whole audience raised their hand that they're familiar with artificial intelligence. It was a big topic in that last fall's conference, so that made sense. But then when we asked who's using it in their supply chain, most of the audience lowered their hands. And then same thing with big data. So in this presentation, we aim to separate the hype behind these buzzwords and provide exposure to really the core concepts behind them. And then also how you can apply them to your organization and your supply chain and where they maybe work well and don't work as well. So we're going to start off by talking about the problem with buzzwords in general, and then we'll provide an approach to buzzwords that alleviates these problems. And then we'll spend a majority of our time going through our list of the top 10 buzzwords in supply chain, and then we'll finish up just with some resources to help with applying these. So as Ben said, my name is Marcus Bugney. I am a master planner at Andersen Corporation. Andersen is the largest and the best window and door manufacturer in North America. 2 years ago, actually, I guess now 3 years ago, Justin and I presented at the ASCM Connect North America Conference on the topic of digital transformation in supply chain. And we have a topic on the same we have an article on the same topic in the Journal of Supply Chain Management, Logistics, and Procurement. And so that was really our first step into the world of buzzwords in supply chain. And then this last fall, we had the opportunity of presenting again at the conference on the topic of buzzwords. And that's the presentation that we're excited to share with you here today.
And I'm Justin Wilcox. I work at JELD-WEN as a senior supply chain manager. If you haven't heard of JELD-WEN before, it is one of the world's largest and best window and door manufacturers. Marcus and I obviously met in college, and like Marcus, I have a tremendous interest in like the intersection between technology and supply chain. And unfortunately, with those two topics, there are a lot of buzzwords. After this presentation, if you want to learn a little bit more, like Marcus said, we'll have some resources, but we also host a podcast together. It's called the Strongest Link Supply Chain Podcast, available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we're kind of in a season break right now, but our whole last season was exploring these buzzwords and going more in depth. So this presentation is sort of a culmination of a lot of the work we've done over the past year or so. All right, so let's move into the content. Like Marcus said, we're going to start with the problem and the approach to buzzwords. So whenever we start to dive into a new topic, I like to make sure everyone is grounded in a similar definition of the term. The term, of course, being buzzwords. So this is the definition that Marcus and I came up with. To us, a buzzword is a fashionable word or phrase that's often overused and misunderstood. They generally originate from some sort of critical concept, but buzzwords can be rendered ineffective through excessive misuse. They serve to convey expertise, but generally lack substantive meaning. So let's dive into the problems that causes organizations a little bit more. Basically, there's 4 things we see. First of all, buzzwords frequently are miscommunicated. They all start as critical core concepts, But as the term becomes more popular, people start using them without really knowing what they mean. And so now all of a sudden, when I say blockchain to some person, it might mean something completely different to another person because it's kind of deviated too far away from where it started. And because of that, there's a lot of missed opportunities. It's very easy for us to come in here and kind of have some levity and make fun of buzzwords, but they're buzzwords because the concept is important at some level, at least in a lot of organizations. So if you're miscommunicating about them, that probably means you're not getting the whole benefit from whatever the concept is. And the two next ones I think are even more impactful. Too frequently, they distract organizations from the real problem. Everyone hears that good supply chain organizations are working on AI or blockchain or whatever, but you may not have a use case in your organization or a problem where AI or blockchain is the solution. And that relates to the next issue is too frequently buzzwords or the concepts that buzzwords are meant to convey are misapplied to problems. Maybe you have inventory inaccuracy and you try and solve that through an application of AI, when really you just need to get your material handlers better scanners or a process that works. So going on to the approach, we basically have 3 steps that we would suggest following. First, research the true meaning. This presentation is a great start and we have additional resources for you, but these terms are prevalent enough. All of us supply chain professionals or ASCM members should really have a pretty good understanding of what they actually are. And that will allow you to, when you're using the term or when you hear the term used to you, define it clearly. So you make sure that everyone is on the same page of what exactly you're talking about. What does AI mean in your organization? What can we use big data for specifically, not just sort of as this broad idea? And then most importantly, focus on the problem. Make sure you have solid processes and you understand where your disconnects are, and then work the solution. Don't start with the buzzword and try and find a problem that might fit the buzzword.
All right, so let's get started into our list of the top 10 buzzwords in supply chain. The first one is a really big one. We could take up the whole presentation on this and more. I'm going to try to keep it relatively high level and just highlight some of the key points and problems and applications of AI. So as we go through these slides, you will see along the top, we have a definition. This is along with what Justin was just saying of defining clearly when we're using these terms. And so the definition for AI is these are systems capable of performing tasks that typically require human intelligence, such as sensory perception, reasoning, learning, adapting, and decision-making. Now, this definition is actually quite broad. And one of the problems with AI is there's some pretty rudimentary things that can be considered AI. Systems and processes from decades ago can fall under this definition, and this will be important for a point I'm going to make in a minute. The other thing you might notice in parentheses along the top, as I mentioned, machine learning. So AI, again, is a very broad definition. Machine learning is a specific approach to AI or a category of AI. And this is where we've seen a lot of development in the last few years. If you use things like ChatGPT, Google Gemini, Microsoft Copilot, those are all a type of machine learning. Now, on the bullet points on the left, the first 3 are items that AI is not. So AI is not a reason to choose one solution over another. And there's 2 reasons for this. And to describe these, I'm going to actually reflect on a personal example. When I was putting this slide together, I was in the market for a new electric razor. And as I was looking at the options, I found that some of them were advertising that they use AI to adjust the speed of the razor blade as you shave. And so at first, I thought that could be cool. But then I looked into it more, did some research, and thought about it and realized there were 2 problems. The first one is, like I mentioned before, AI is a broad definition, and there can really be some fairly rudimentary things, calculations that can be considered AI. And so the razor I was looking at, I found out it wasn't really doing much advanced stuff. It wasn't any more advanced or better than the competitors or than previous generations that weren't using the term AI. They were just using that term probably to try to catch on the hype and sell the product. The second problem I realized is that I don't even want AI or a machine learning model in my razor. I want a razor that's simple and easy to clean and maintain. It lasts a long time and it gives a close shave. So it's not actually addressing the problems and what I'm looking for in a new razor. So as we relate back to supply chain, those two things hold true. We need to really understand what the AI is doing as we're looking at solutions to our problems and maybe some of the technologies we're looking at implementing or advertising AI. We should not just take that and think that it means it's going to be a better solution. We need to figure out what it's actually doing and is that actually bringing value to us. And then the second thing again is it actually addressing what we're looking for? Is it solving our problems, or is it just a feature that they've added that maybe does use real AI, or maybe it is a real machine learning model, but maybe it's not actually addressing what we need it to? By the way, I did end up buying that AI razor. I still don't really know what the AI is doing other than changing the blade speed. I haven't really noticed anything. The second item on here, and I bought the razor for the other reasons, the three reasons I mentioned, not because of the AI. Just want to clarify that. The second item on here is that AI just means replacing people. It seems like all the time when we hear about AI, it's about replacing people. But really in supply chain, I think the power is in doing things that we haven't been able to effectively do before. Getting into things like advanced optimization, advanced forecasting and planning, and so on. And I'll talk through a few of these on the next slide. And then my third point on here is that, at least in the current landscape, AI does not have a deep understanding and common sense. Now, I mentioned machine learning before, and machine learning is probably the most advanced AI type of AI we have right now. And the way I like to think of machine learning is it's sort of like a statistical model calculating the most appropriate result. And the calculation for it is mind-boggling complex. But what it does is it ends up resulting in where it can make mistakes and can be unpredictable. It's not actually understanding what it's doing. It's, again, calculating what the best response is. And so one of the problems is when it does make mistakes or is unpredictable, it can be difficult to figure out why and to correct that behavior. Now, of course, these are improving and getting better at this, but it is still a gap out there. My last point on this slide, though, is oftentimes when we hear about AI and supply chain, it's talked about as some magical thing that will come in and transform our supply chain. And it's talked about something just ready to go. Like, why aren't you using it today? You need to take it, just throw it at all your problems and it'll fix everything. But we have to recognize that AI is another technology. It's a really powerful technology, but we still need to understand what our problems are, apply this where it works well, and there's a lot of work that needs to go into the implementation and testing and make sure things are working and maintaining. Now, there was some research done by the Upwork Research Institute that surveyed employees that work at organizations where they have implemented AI to try to increase productivity. But 77% of the employees had reported that their productivity had decreased and their workload had increased. Now, there are a few reasons that the research mentioned for causes of this. Examples of these include the additional time to monitor and correct the AI, and then just the time to interact with, work with the AI, implement, and all that. And so this, I will say, is coming up on a year old, this research. So I would like to see refreshed research. I think that percent will improve, but there is still a gap. And as we've seen in the industry, some of the companies that bought into AI in the last couple of years are backtracking a little bit. And what I trace this back to is in Amara's law. It states that we tend to overestimate the effect of a technology in the short run and underestimate the effect in the long run. So I think a lot of organizations were overestimating the capabilities of AI and just, again, trying to grab it and just like throw it at all their supply chain problems and thinking it'll fix it. But as we go through all these buzzwords, a common theme is that you need to start with your problem. And so with AI, if your problem is you have a lot of manual processes and you're you have like Excel files and reports. You may think that AI could help you out and could help automate some of that, but really it's, in most cases, it's not the best solution for that. There are other solutions out there geared specifically for automating data flows and reports and all that, and they'll prove to be more reliable and cost effective in the long run typically. Or if you're looking to get a system to make decisions for you unsupervised, again, AI, I would say, probably isn't quite ready for that. If it's straightforward logic, there are other systems that can do that. And or maybe you just need someone to review it to monitor the results. But areas where supply chains have found a lot of value from AI is from generating insights from large data sets, predicting supply chain disruptions, optimization models, and forecasting and planning has been a really big one, with a lot of organizations reporting that it has brought a lot of value in using AI and machine learning in their forecasting and planning. And not just for orders, but you can think of other things as well, like downtime and market conditions.
All right, the next buzzword we're covering is digital transformation. And as Marcus mentioned earlier, this is one of the first ones that really got us down this buzzword rabbit hole. And it used to be just so prevalent. It still is very prevalent. And to me, when I see digital transformation misused out there, it's generally the top three things on the slide. Companies are out there promoting new specific technologies like a software package as being what you need to digitally transform. And if you can just upgrade your system to whatever this newer product is, then you have, as an organization, I guess, digitally transformed yourselves. The other thing I see happen a lot is taking processes the way they are today and just kind of plugging digital into it and calling that digital transformation. If your process is inherently disconnected or broken, it's still going to have problems if you digitize or automate it. It just might have problems a little bit faster with less people doing that. What digital transformation definitely is a cultural shift in the organization where you start to solve problems with a digital toolkit and mindset instead of just manual processes and procedures. And it all needs to start with a very customer-centric point of view. And for that reason, digital transformation, I would argue, is more about change agents in your organization, the people who understand your processes and have the drive and ability to actually change them for the better. It's more about them and the leadership support that they receive than it actually is about specific technologies. And as Marcus and I were researching this and developing the article we published on the topic, we actually thought that digital transformation was very similar to like the hierarchy of needs that you probably learned about in psychology classes in college. And it's really a journey. And most organizations are starting near the bottom of that pyramid, but what they should strive to do is work their way towards the top until they are an innovative and adaptive company that is disrupting their industry instead of trying to get caught up on all their internal problems. So Marcus and I actually developed a little bit of a platform with how you can get started with digital transformation in your organization. And if you read the steps, it's not that dissimilar to PDCA because PDCA works. It's a really good and well accepted operations and supply chain concept. But you first have to define the opportunity. So find a broken, painful process in your organization and sell a specific reprocess or new technology to your leaders and use that as a pilot or an experiment. Evaluate the success and then iterate on that process until you can create a roadmap that gets you to that culture where you're innovative and adaptive. And I think for most of the organizations probably represented on this call, that doesn't mean you have to buy a bunch of new systems or hire a bunch of people. You probably have the building blocks and the right people with the right drive in your organization already. Not a guarantee, but I would be willing to bet that most of you do. And it's more about redefining, like doing the work to actually find the pain that your customers are experiencing, redefining those processes that are causing that pain, and then identifying the digital tools that'll help solve it. And that's really where you need to get into the identification of change agents in your organization and elevate them and offload them so that they have the bandwidth and can dedicate the focus to actually getting the organization started in that direction. Eventually, if you do that long enough, you will climb that pyramid and eclipse your competitors.
All right. Now, the third buzz phrase is big data. This one I think was really big, I think about 3 or 4 years ago, and it still is big today. But the definition for this is data sets with too high volume of records, velocity of intake, or variety of data types to be able to use a traditional database. Big data does not simply mean gathering more data or doing more analysis, and it's not valuable in itself. Big data is about enabling the use of data sets that wouldn't be as effective or even possible in traditional databases. And so if you look on the left side of the slide, these are what are called the 3 V's of big data. And depending on the source, you might see 4 or 5 or 7 of these V words, but these 3 are the core 3. And what these help identify is if you have a supply chain solution where you're going to need terabytes of data, then big data starts to perform better than a traditional database. Or if you're looking at a high velocity of data intake, like millions or billions of records a day, then big data performs better. Or if you're looking at a variety of data. And what this means is structured data is like a traditional database where you've clearly defined fields and formats. But unstructured data could be pulling information from social media or images, even audio. And even if you're just connecting to external data sources that may not have a well-formatted data source. And so my main point with big data here, if you look on the lower right, is that supply chain typically shouldn't suggest big data. Like I said, it's not valuable in itself to just take your existing data or taking a solution and putting it in big data. It's that big data is enabling if you need more data, more velocity, more variety. And so my point is you should really leave that to your IT teams to determine. There needs to be collaboration like everything. You need to work with your technology partners, but they're the ones who are the experts in this area and can determine whether you're going to require a big data solution or not.
All right, the next one is definitely, I think, increasing in its prevalence out there, just with the world's current events right now, and that's resilience. This one is frequently misused to sort of just mean extra inventory. A lot of executives I know will kind of use those two interchangeably because it is a pretty effective and easy strategy to become more resilient. But really, to say that you have a resilient supply chain, you have to be confident that you can withstand and bounce back from setbacks or what I would call adversarial forces. These could be things from your competitors or just things evolving in the marketplace that have a particularly negative impact on your organization when compared to perhaps your competitors. The other thing that resilience is not going to do that I think is misunderstood is that it never eliminates risk. And it does not give you the ability to weather any storm, unfortunately. I don't think we have to go any farther than the trade war that's unfolding right now to think of a practical example of that. I don't think anyone could have predicted that it would have gone quite the way that it has thus far. It seems sometimes that there's a bit of a surprise every day. So the idea that you could predict every little, possible combination of events that could play out and pre-prepare like a booklet of what do I do when is simply unrealistic. Now, what resilience is understanding the different process risks that you have within your company and determining like what your mitigation strategies are on those process risks. And by doing that, you decrease your exposure to that risk, not eliminate, you decrease it and make your organization more likely to be able to bounce back. So if we go on to the next slide, there's a number of different categories of risks that are basically directed at every organization. Geopolitical is an obvious one. Variation is another obvious one. If you have processes that don't produce a consistent result, that in and of itself will generate some risk for your organization. And then process disconnects, like we've talked about in some of these other buzzwords. If things are inherently broken today, once your organization is under some kind of stress, they're not going to get any better. It'll simply only get worse. So start with the problem in your organization. Don't emphasize thinking of every possible solution, and don't simply design waste and excess and inventory into your supply chain, just sort of throwing throwing money at issues that may never occur. But rather, take each of these different areas of risk and come up with a specific mitigation strategy that could work in your organization in a variety of ways. Develop an understanding and kind of cost benefit for each of these strategies so that you can have those sort of pre-prepared conversations with your finance counterparts or whoever it is that you need buy-in to pull the trigger on these strategies. And by putting all of that together, that's really where you start to get a comprehensive strategy of mitigation tactics. And that is what makes an organization resilient.
All right, number 5 is demand sensing. So demand sensing is adjusting a near-term forecast based on real-time data like point of sale, website usage, weather, and social media. Demand sensing is not fixing your current forecast or adjusting your forecast more frequently. Sometimes how I'll hear it used is demand sensing by weighting your more recent demand patterns more than older stuff. Again, that's not what demand sensing is. Demand sensing is about using real-time demand signals to make dynamic near-term adjustment to your existing forecast. So it's about improving your current forecasting in the near term, and it can also be used to increase the level of detail. And so if you look on the right side, you'll see that we still have our traditional forecast that goes out through the long term. But once we get closer in the short term, or even potentially a little bit in the medium term, we start to use demand sensing to adjust that forecast, using things like point of sale, website traffic, website interactions, social media interactions, weather, economic indicators, your current open orders, even local events and promotions, and use that to, again, adjust that forecast. Or maybe your forecast is at like a product family level, and as you get to that short term, it uses that data to try to forecast a little better at a more detailed product level. And so again, with demand sensing, we want to start with a problem. Again, sometimes we see that organizations try to implement demand sensing to fix their current forecast because their current forecast is very inaccurate or always out of date. But that seems to actually make things worse because you're then adjusting on an already broken process. Where demand sensing really does well is if you desire more responsiveness to the customer, or an example is maybe you have a bunch of stockouts and overstock on varying parts because of frequent demand fluctuation, then demand sensing might be able to help with that. Or another situation is if you have uncertainty around new product. You still need to forecast the new product, but then as you see those real-time indicators coming, you can adapt quicker. And so I'd like to walk through just an example of what this could look like, and this will hopefully start to tie together some of these buzzwords for us. So let's say our problem is that we have stockouts due to demand fluctuation. And so at a high level, our forecast is fairly accurate. But then as you drill down to the individual products and weeks, there's a lot of up and down demand variation due to customer choice. So we decide we want to take a look at demand sensing and see, can we utilize demand sensing to adjust that forecast to try to reduce those stockouts and predict when maybe there's a surge in a certain product or that variation week to week or even day to day potentially. And so what we decide we want to do is, again, use demand sensing, and we want to look at our retailers' point of sale data. We want to look at our website and social media traffic and interactions. And we want to look at weather, and we want to look at local events and promotions. And so we want to gather that data and see if there are correlations to this demand variation with those demand signals. And so as we continue out mapping our solution, our technology partner identifies that really the data we're looking at gathering is a high volume of data, it's a high velocity and high variety. And so they identify we're not going to be able to use our typical solutions, our traditional databases. We're going to have to use a big data solution to be able to handle this data. And so then we continue on mapping our solution further, and we identify another problem. With all this data, how do we quickly and relatively frequently take it, analyze it, and figure out what adjustments to make to the forecast? That really, in my opinion, is probably the hardest part. Well, I shouldn't say the hardest part. A very difficult part of demand sensing is you need to take this data and figure out what level you want to adjust and what confidence you want to use on it. And so the solution we come up with in that situation is to utilize AI, or more specifically, a machine learning model, to analyze that data and come up with a recommended adjustment to the forecast. And we'll review that adjustment and make sure it's good and isn't too aggressive and those sorts of things. But that'll help us react quicker because the demand sensing, as we're talking about, is a short term. So it can't be a once a month adjustment. It needs to be more frequent than that. And so machine learning helps us do this. Now, this example on the right side is fictitious, but it is loosely based on sort of what Pepsi does. They use demand sensing, some of those indicators I was talking about before, and I'm not certain if they use big data or not. I think there's a good chance they do because of those amount of data, but then they use machine learning to take that and analyze and determine their adjustments.
All right, so we made it halfway through our buzzwords. We're going to take a brief pause for some audience participation. Obviously, we have the Zoom chat is probably the best way to do this. So if you want to take a look at the question and go ahead and type what you think the answer is in the chat, and I'll be watching as to who's been paying attention. All right, so here's our first one. Companies that do not have a solid implementation of the fundamentals of forecasting may want to move right to demand sensing to improve their forecast accuracy. True or false? What do people think? Ooh, I'm getting a whole lot of false. Sounds pretty good to me. Do you want to enlighten us, Marcus? It is false indeed. That one was too easy. Let's go into the next one. All right. Blank involves a journey from disconnected and disparate processes, often performed manually, to new customer-focused processes utilizing digital technology. Is that AI or digital transformation? Oh, every single person, I think, is getting this one right. Go ahead. Yep, that is digital transformation. All right, let's see if the next one's any harder. Supply chain managers need to know when their problems demand the use of big data. Is that true or false? All right, people are on it. We're getting a lot of false, Marcus, and false is indeed the answer. This next one I know is going to trick some people up. All right, which presenter, is it me or Marcus, works for the best window and door manufacturer? Okay, we have some fun answers coming in. Do you want to enlighten us, Marcus? Oh man, why does it always do that? Shucks. Well, we'll never know the answer to that one, everyone. Sorry. We'll just have to move on to our next buzzword, which is agile. This one's really interesting. This one sort of comes from the IT discipline. I'm sure you've all heard about it. The agile concept when it applies to like an IT systems implementation, but it is used a lot in reference to supply chains as well. We're defining it as a supply chain engineered to be responsive to rapid market changes through flexible processes and standardization. And that can sometimes be a little discombobulating for people because we're saying that process and standardization is the best thing to make an organization flexible and agile. That's kind of odd, right? But what agile certainly isn't is short-sighted planning and focus, or rapidly iterating through processes and org structures based on whatever today's crisis or market condition is. What agile is when it's successful is that you have a lot of standards and engineered processes in your organization that are very crisp, and you've developed sort of your org structure and the people in your organization around those standards and processes to be really experts at what they do. What that allows you to do is as those changing market conditions happen, or as you're presented with a particular risk, whatever it may be, your organization has the knowledge, the skill set, and probably most importantly, the bandwidth to think critically about whatever it is that is happening and either develop a new process to deal with that thing, or I think more frequently you'll find that they can adapt the well-engineered, well-designed processes that already exist in the organization to be successful in whatever that new condition is.
Number 7 is a stand-up meeting. Now, this one, there's a lot of meetings out there that are sort of similar. They each have some differences, but we see these used a lot. So stand-up meeting is one of them, but some other terms that are similar in some ways are daily huddles, weekly huddles, tier meetings, staff meetings, check-ins, and so on. And so a stand-up meeting is a brief daily or weekly meeting to review progress, state plans, and highlight obstacles. There does seem to be consensus, though, that these meetings are overused. And there's 3 problems with these meetings. The first one, I think, is fairly obvious. They're expensive. There's typically quite a few people involved with them. And if they're 15 minutes, they usually end up going over that. And then you multiply that by, if you're doing that every day or even every week, that ends up to be a lot of time. And then you have to add on top of that, that it takes some time before the meeting to get ready for it. And if it's physical, to get there. And then also afterwards, time to adjust and get back into the productivity zone. And so there are some estimates that that's an additional 30 minutes per meeting of lost productivity. And so they're quite expensive. The second problem with these meetings is they're almost always with the wrong people. It seems like in all of these meetings, or at least almost all the ones I've been in, there are topics that are talked about that aren't relevant to all the attendees. But then on the flip side, there are topics that are talked about that would be better had with people who are not attendees of the meeting. And so these meetings are almost always with the wrong people. The third problem with these is that they cause delay in your business, in your supply chain. Because when like roadblocks and milestones and questions, they don't come up on Monday at 9 a.m. They come up throughout the week and throughout the days. And by waiting for these meetings to communicate these out, you're ending up causing delay. And so with these meetings, it's important to start with the problem. If your problem is that there's a lack of status updates, you don't know who's working on what milestones are being reached, what questions and roadblocks are coming up, you may think that this will be a good solution. But really, there's a lot of other tools out there that are geared specifically for this sort of thing that fixes those 3 problems that I mentioned earlier. And then, and actually, I'll even add that there's even some of the tools used today for other things, like even Outlook, Teams, a whiteboard, can be used effectively for this if managed correctly. The second situation where you may think you might want to start a stand-up meeting is if there's what I like to call communication buildup. And the idea with this is, rather than communicating out everything that needs to be communicated right away, sometimes it's easier just to add it to a list and just build up the things that you need to communicate to your coworkers or to your team. And then you have a once a week meeting and just dump it all out. And then for the next time, you sort of build it all up, add to your list, and then dump it all out. But that causes the 3 problems I talked about before. And I think in that situation, it causes information overload, and it's hard for people to really get the information that they need out of it. But situations where stand-up meetings work well is if maybe you have those lack of status updates and it's because your communication is broken or slow, then these are a good temporary solution to get things going. And you should focus on the core problem and try to fix that. But these are a quick way to see results. And so if your communication is broken or slow, you can set one of these up, but work on the alternative so that you can take this meeting off everyone's calendar down the road. And then another situation where people do recognize that it does bring some value is if your team is disconnected. Now, if you do decide to go the route of a stand-up meeting, there are a lot of resources online, and we have a couple, I think, at the end that can help make sure that you're having effective stand-up meetings.
All right, we're getting down towards the end here. Number 8 is omnichannel. The best way that I can help explain what I think is wrong with the way omnichannel is used is by comparing two very different industries. So when you think about going to the store to buy milk, it's a very transactional type purchase. You go to the grocery store, it's probably one of many things on your list. You buy it, you consume it, and then you repeat the next time you go to the grocery store. When it comes to something maybe a bit more personal or exciting, like a new cell phone, people treat that entirely different. Once a new cell phone model is announced, people pre-order it sometimes weeks ahead of time. Back in the old days, they used to wait in line in front of the store. Some people still do that. And then after you have the cell phone, there's a whole host of services that you can get for it, accessories, all those sorts of things. So what omnichannel is not, and how I see it very frequently misused, is that every company should implement every possible delivery method to get as close to your customer as possible, and then expand and add complexity to your business. If you're a dairy company, you don't need to have an online portal where customers go in and track their milk through the manufacturing process. I would probably find that kind of interesting, but I'm guessing most people would not. However, that is what people expect when you buy a new cell phone and you pre-ordered it. You want to be able to see when it's in the box or on the container across the ocean and on its way to you. Or when you order a new car, you want, different progress reports and check-ins on when you're going to be getting this. Then after you have the product, you want to be able to interact with it and wherever you got it a little bit more. So what omnichannel really should be is understanding what your customers want and then building process around that and integrating it with some sort of digital experience, right? If you're buying a new cell phone, you can go into a physical store and get it. You can order it online. If you don't like it, you can go to the physical store and return it, or you can return it online. You have all these different options and they're all connected and seamless together in that example.
All right, does anyone want to guess what the next buzzword is? This is the first one I think of when I think of buzzwords. It really encapsulates, I think, the problems and the opportunity of buzzwords. One. All right, I'll just go forward here. It's blockchain. This one, this was really the first buzzword that I really dove into because it was talked about so much. And I guess I don't remember the timeline here, but maybe it was 5 or 7 years ago when this really came up, and it was talked about as something that every supply chain basically should know about and should get into and have in their business. And so I really dove into it to try to understand what it actually means. Where does it actually need to be or beneficial to apply? And what I have up here is a definition. Now, of course, blockchain has a technical definition that is much different than this. It's a technology. But really what encapsulates blockchain and supply chain is it's a decentralized, trustworthy record of transaction. And so if we break this down, by decentralized, no single organization owns the transactions on the blockchain. And it's trustworthy, meaning that it's tamper-proof and uneditable. So what transactions are put on the blockchain can't be changed after the fact. And it's a record of transactions. So again, it's just, we're putting these transactions basically on the blockchain. So these can be purchase orders, shipments, quality checks, quality certifications, payments, smart contracts, and so on. By the way, smart contracts are contracts that execute automatically based on the preset conditions. We want to take a little bit different view of this as well to illustrate what a blockchain could look like. And so if you start on the left side, let's say that our supply chain starts out where we mine some material. And when that material gets mined, we have it set up where it posts a block to the blockchain saying that we mined this material at this location, this quantity on this day, and whatever other information we decide to put on the blockchain. And then the next step is it gets shipped. And then when it's shipped, we have it set up to post another block saying it was shipped from here to here, that sort of information, then received. And I think you get the point as we go through the supply chain. And then at the end, as a customer, or at any point really in the blockchain, you can look back and see where that material came from, or what quality checks it received and certifications it got and all that. But really, as I'm talking through this, you may start to see two problems with blockchain. The first thing is what we talk through here is visibility doesn't seem unique to blockchain. And this was my problem with blockchain, is it was talked about as to get visibility in your supply chain, you need blockchain. But I would disagree with that. There's a lot of other tools and systems out there that can help increase your visibility in your supply chain. And not every situation needs all this visibility to that level of detail that blockchain brings. Sometimes you just need a little more visibility to your supplier or your supplier's supplier. The second problem with this is there is a risk that the physical isn't represented correctly on the digital. And I think that's always going to be a problem with our having the digital side and the physical side as we do in supply chain. There are some approaches to reduce that, but that is one of the problems. So up there, when I say trustworthy, the digital side is trustworthy and tamper-proof, but there is still a risk of the physical side being tampered with. So again, if we think back to starting with the problem, if your problem is that you need more visibility to your upstream suppliers, blockchain could get you that, but there might be better solutions for you. But if your problem maybe is there isn't trust within your supply chain, you don't maybe have strong partnerships with everyone in your supply chain, maybe blockchain might be easier to integrate because it's decentralized and trustworthy, easier to get buy-in. Or I think the most common example where blockchain is used is if your customer is demanding to see this visibility, this trustworthy visibility. So if they're sourced from certain areas, ethical products, things like that, that's where blockchain can be used, because then the customer trusts that that data on the blockchain is the initial transaction posted, and they can tie their product to it.
All right, our final buzzword is Gemba. I almost hate calling this a buzzword because it's a concept I really believe in and try and practice as much as I can. But unfortunately, it is definitely also a buzzword. How I see it misused most frequently is that we have the same conversations that we would in the office, and we bring all the same dysfunction along with us, just into a new, slightly less convenient for everyone involved location. The other thing that I see a lot is that when people who don't go out into the shop floor have the direct experience observing processes as much, that they go out to Gemba and they focus a little bit too much on the people aspect of the process instead of the process itself. So maybe you'll have an executive out there watching a process happen, and they'll say something like, "Well, why aren't they just moving faster? Where's the spring in their step? Can't they do any better than this?" Well, where really the idea of Gemba is to have that direct observation of the tactical processes that run your organization. And the whole purpose of that is to give you a new insight and perspective. It's really an educational tool for you to use for you to more accurately understand what's going on in your organization. And it's just that. All right, so let's wrap it up with a couple of takeaways. We're going to revisit our approach to buzzwords. We hope that we've given you a pretty good basis in the meaning of these different terms and defined them hopefully pretty clearly for you. And then we've always gone back to focusing on the problem. I think we've said that for almost every single buzzword that we talked about. Make sure the problem is at the center of your focus in whatever you're implementing. We've also prepared a buzzword framework. So I think there's a recording being sent out. We'll see if we can send out the slides for this as well. This is something that you could reference if you're wondering, maybe you have one of the problems on the left. Perhaps a buzzword is a good fit, but there might be some prerequisites that you may need to implement in your organization as well. We've also done a different job of organizing them into three different sort of groups. So there are those that are drivers, enablers, and the foundational steps of your organization. Drivers are things that may take your organization to the next level if they're a good fit. The foundation is what you have to have as a prerequisite, and the enablers are in between those two extremes, making sure that you can get your drivers to work properly. So for instance, if you're talking about AI or machine learning, and an enabler might be the big data to input it and perhaps the forecast fundamentals so that you have a good basis of information. The same thing is true with demand sensing. It has its own set of enablers. And then when we talk about resilience, really all of these concepts apply if you're going to be truly a resilient organization. You have to have solid processes. Similarly, when it comes to foundation, digital transformation will help you develop some of these enablers. The same is true of process engineering and Gemba. And then your organization and communication is obviously critical to every single one of these enablers. And so if you think about it holistically, these are all useful terms. They're all terms for us to have in our toolbox, and they sort of interact with each other between drivers, enablers, and foundation. And if you're starting with your problem, you should be able to pick the right sort of sequence of foundation, enablers, and drivers to help get you the solution you want. So with that, we're just about out of time. This is the additional resources that we mentioned a couple of times in the presentation. Marcus and I also have our contact information on this slide. Again, reminder, the Strongest Link Supply Chain Podcast, where you can learn a little bit more about some of these terms. We used all this content to help research this presentation, and I think if you want to go deeper into any of these are all really good resources. One last plug I'll make, we talked a lot about having the right process and how that's really critical to being successful with any of these core terms. If that's something you're struggling with in your organization, I put an organization that can help educate and promote process development in your companies as well. But with that, I think we'll open the floor to any questions you might have.